welcome to Table Talk with Brenda Perryman. And we have a great table talk for you today because so much has gone on in the city of Detroit and in the whole wide world. And as I said before, I'm Brenda Perryman, and I'd like to introduce my co-hosts.
Robert Thomas.
Chris Summerall.
I'm Ken Coleman.
And we have a lot to do today but before we begin, I'd like to express my deepest sympathy for one of our co-hosts, Dr. Rose Moten, who's on the ladies' version of Table Talk. Dr. Rose lost her mom last weekend after the show, and we all send our deepest sympathies to Rose and the entire Moten family and the 13 grandchildren that Miss Eliza Moten had, and she has one on the way, and plus all the great friends she had and all the wonderful memories, and us here at WHPR, R.J. Watkins, and Mr. Henry Tyler, and all the staff of WHPR, and of course, her brothers and sisters on Table Talk, and who work with Table Talk, including my producer, Miss Michelle Watson, who I couldn't do without. Rest in peace, Mrs. Moten. And now we're going to start with our regular, I want to announce something really, really quick. Next weekend is the Highland Park Film Festival, everybody, and all of us should try to come out. It's on the grounds of McGregor Library, which is up on Woodward in Rhode Island and Massachusetts and up there. And they're going to have straight ahead a lot of jazz groups and all of that. And then the Highland Park Community Choir is going to perform it's the alumni and community choir. They're going to perform on Sunday evening at Healing Springs Baptist Church. So it's going to be a wonderful, wonderful event. So I'm just getting you ready, getting you prepared to get your lawn chairs, and it's going to be a lot of fun, a lot of family. Now I'd like to introduce my co-host. I've done that. I'd like to go to Ken Coleman, who's going to tell us about his book, On This Day, and what happened on this day in African American life in Detroit.
Well, indeed, July 12th, Brenda, has been a very eventful day in our city's history. It was on this day in 1944 that Denise Nicholas was born. And Brenda, I know you know Denise Nicholas well.
Room 222.
Room 222 in the heat of the night. Remember that?
Yes.
That NBC show with Carol O'Connor and actress Denise Nicholas. She was born on this day in 1944. Interesting. Also, for the ladies who might be watching who are part of a Greek fraternity, it was on this day, 2006, when the Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority held its national convention.
Sorority!
The AKAs were here in Detroit holding their national convention just a few years ago, Brenda, in 2006. And those are two very eventful things that happened on July 12th in our city's history.
Surrounding women. Okay, well, we have some things to talk about internationally, and I'd like to talk a little bit on Mr. Nelson Mandela, and he is still listed in critical yet stable condition in the hospital in South Africa. And I was reading an interesting article, and I guess we're not going to get into it that much, but how, in this country, we do pull the plug after a certain time when a person's quality of life isn't there and they're on a respirator. Well, they don't have any guidelines of standards about that in South Africa. And a lot of people, and Ariel Sharon, who's in Israel, he was a prime minister, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's been on life support since 2006. And then I remember Reverend Cecil Franklin was on life support for quite a while too, wasn't he?
About 5 years. Mm-hmm.
So this is something to think about. Would you rather him have that good quality of life or just lay there and languish and perish? Who knows? Who knows? But we wish him well. And wouldn't it be wonderful if he came up out of that? That would be remarkable too. Okay, now to national news. And Ken, why don't you start about the Zimmerman trial?
Absolutely. I think the trial that most of us have been watching throughout America and probably throughout the world is the George Zimmerman trial. And of course, George Zimmerman is the 29-year-old Sanford, Florida native who has been accused of second-degree murder of Trayvon Martin, a young African-American boy. That trial certainly went through its final stages this week, and both sides giving their closing arguments, and we expect that the jury, a 9-person jury, which 6 people will actually serve actively, and there'll be 3 alternates, that jury may receive instructions as early as today and begin to deliberate over 3 options that they would have in the fate of Mr. George Zimmerman. One is the second-degree murder charge. The second is a manslaughter charge, and of course the third one is a not guilty charge. And so I'm interested, guys, to be sure, and certainly Brenda, what do you think about this trial? We saw some interesting closing arguments of this week. We saw it's a very active trial. I mean, you know, basically prosecutors getting, defense attorneys getting on the ground and using dummies and trying to reenact what was obviously an unfortunate incident. Robert, what do you think? What have been your thoughts thus far?
So far, I believe that I don't see how the defense is really going to win this with all of the options that's out there. You said it's 3 options now. I think they just introduced the second option, I believe yesterday
This week.
or the day before yesterday.
Right.
The judge intervened to the fact that you can claim manslaughter also. But I personally believe that the prosecution is going to prove its case.
A second-degree murder or manslaughter, though. Why don't you explain to our audience the difference between second-degree murder and manslaughter?
Well, manslaughter is pretty much an unjustifiable, inexcusable, and intentional killing. Often it's on a human being without deliberation, premeditation, or malice. And manslaughter is the same thing, but it's involuntary, pretty much. And it's manslaughter is a happy medium between first-degree murder and pretty much the middle ground between first-degree murder and manslaughter.
Okay, and we have a call, and we'll get to second-degree murder in just a minute. Good afternoon, caller.
Hi.
Hi, could you speak up, please?
Yeah, I was under the impression, actually, I thought you had Mike Duggan there as well.
No, I wasn't. No, he wasn't scheduled to be on our show this afternoon at 1.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
I wanted to comment on just the ebb and flow of the personal relation, the personal interpretation of this trial via social media. We're all familiar with Facebook. We're all familiar with Twitter. And a week ago, the tone of the public was just infuriated with the prosecutor's office. And this week, most notably the last day and a half, 2 days, we've seen a total 180 because obviously the prosecution has went on the attack. And I found it interesting that in the course of just 3 days of courtroom activity, the public's perception of the attorneys who are prosecuting Mr. Zimmerman have totally changed. And I found that interesting, an interesting dynamic.
Well, I think sometimes you've heard of the thing, give somebody enough rope to hang yourself. And I think that's what happened. I think they gave the defense enough rope to hang themselves. And they had a lot of the defense brought in a lot of different witnesses, the ones who said, that was Georgie's voice, that was Georgie screaming. I don't know how my own son screams right now. And I mean, he's a grown man. I haven't heard him scream since he was a little boy. So I don't know. I mean, and guys' voices do change. I just had major, major issues with that. And as they stated, if you're the one screaming if George Zimmerman was screaming, why did the screaming stop the second the gunfire was shot? You know, that he killed Trayvon Martin. But the social media thing is good. I guess we had to wait it out. But Robert, we were talking about second-degree murder. Can you explain that?
Well, second-degree murder is once again is intentional killing that is not premeditated or planned or committed for a reasonable reason. It's a killing caused by dangerous conduct and offenders' obvious lack of concern for another human's life.
Didn't they say that also you had to have some malice towards the person too? I think you have to have some malice because they said that George Zimmerman did have malice towards black young men because he said those effing punks, they are getting away with murder and so forth. Can we all talk about that? Assumptions, that's what the prosecutor said.
I saw part of that cross-examination of the witness, and to me it was a little bit misleading because I believe it was an associate of Mr. Zimmerman, when asked about that term, these punks always get away or something, they asked, well, is that a derogatory statement? And I believe the young lady said, well, no, it's not necessarily a derogatory statement. And so what you saw was really what we all in the public would consider just basic, blatant untruths. Yeah. You call a spade, you're not going to use that type of terminology. Yeah. So you're not going to use that type of terminology to compliment someone or to highlight something positive. And so I think that it really backfired on them with regard to that witness testimony.
Well, I want to add on, when you're talking about social media, and this conversation we had just a couple minutes ago, but you're talking about social media and you add it on to what's going on in the trial. It's going on very differently. And I want to add also that both the defense and prosecutors they're very skilled and calculated with the reasons behind how they target their witnesses and the questions they're asking. So, we're sitting at home, we're looking at social media, we're responding on social media, but what's going on in that courtroom are, the jurors' responses and, what the jurors are thinking. We can't really tell what all of those women are thinking, and I'm pretty sure the jurors out there that were selected, that was also skilled and calculated.
Well, let's take an informal poll right now. Ken, what do you think the verdict may be?
I think it could be manslaughter. I mean, I thought what was interesting in the 11th hour of this trial is that manslaughter gets introduced as an option. In a way, sort of, well, if you don't necessarily believe second-degree murder and you don't necessarily believe not guilty, manslaughter could be an option. So you hate to handicap these type of things, and I'm certainly not going out and making a prediction, if you will, but what I am saying is I would not be surprised to see a manslaughter verdict come back from the jury.
I personally think it probably will now be manslaughter. I thought that he was going to be pretty much hit with the second-degree murder charge.
Well, one of the
Conviction.
I want to ask Chris what he thinks, and then I want to ask you why, Robert, after you.
I'm torn in between both Robert and Ken. I think the only surprise for me would be if he was not guilty. And so anywhere between the actual manslaughter, between those two options, neither would surprise me. But with the introduction of the manslaughter at this point in the trial, I think that is probably where I see that this may conclude.
Okay, Robert.
Well, I personally believe that the prosecution has proved this case. And I didn't see how Zimmerman would walk, and I just don't see that being an option. So I'm saying that manslaughter now, because it's a lesser charge, and it's since it's being put out there, and they had an option to go on second-degree murder, but now you're looking at the fact that okay, there are some holes in the prosecution's case, and there are a lot of holes in the defense's case, but we can give him the lesser option out of the two charges.
Absolutely, and some people think that the prosecution overcharged. I wonder what my audience thinks. Do you think that it's going to be not guilty, acquittal, manslaughter, or second-degree murder? Now, I think the judge sees that there is some kind of probable cause that they can have manslaughter, and to note, everybody, that manslaughter is, you could get up to 30 years for manslaughter in Florida. If you want to call us, 313-868-0342 or 868-0351. I've said those numbers 5,000 times. I don't know what's blocking me out. But what I do note, also I wanted to say about the trial, is one of the witnesses, expert witnesses that they had on day before yesterday, I believe, who said that Trayvon Martin was very athletic and all of this stuff, saying things about this young man, and he didn't know the young man or anything, saying George Zimmerman was a weakling, and they had the guy who ran the gym that George Zimmerman went to, and he spent many hours there. Now the guy said, well, he was a weakling. Well, if he was a weakling, why did you advertise your gym with, this is where George Zimmerman trains? What do you all think about that?
Well, obviously he's trying to get fannies into that gym, and so George Zimmerman, his name, his brand, if you will, if you can call it that in a situation like this, is highly profitable. The interesting thing about what you see, I think, and it's probably no different than, it's probably sort of standard trial stuff is, the prosecution, everybody that comes up there is obviously got to, they are picked and selected to make the case for the prosecution. The defense is the same way. And so I don't know that we should really be surprised that, the defense attorney, the defense team, makes every effort to make Zimmerman look like, a weakling. Doesn't physically look like one, to be sure, but that is what their argument is. And in the same way, obviously opposite, but the same type of, thrust would be given by the Trayvon Martin prosecution team. I mean, look, it's part of trials. As an African American, I've cringed at parts of this trial.
What part was
well, most of it, particularly being an African American man and hearing how an African American teenager has been described, and and just some of the very sort of profiling things that we know are very much real about living in America, although technically they weren't able to say racial profiling in the testimony. It's very troubling to watch as African American men, particularly someone with a young child.
Well, and I think with regard to the whole Zimmerman being a weakling, I don't think that he thought he was a weakling, because common sense tells you that weaklings don't pursue people. They flee from people. And in this case, Trayvon Martin was pursued by Mr. Zimmerman. And so we can use a little common sense. It doesn't always require, no offense, Rob, a law degree. We're raised, and there's certain truths that are inescapable. And so this bringing in a gym owner and saying that Mr. Zimmerman was a weakling in comparison to who? A boy?
Yeah.
Or you, a gym owner? So I think that that's all relative, and I don't think for a second Mr. Zimmerman considered himself to be a weakling when pursuing that young boy.
And I can add, definitely not with a gun. You're never a weakling carrying a gun around, profiling illegally a kid, which, those terms are definitely not being introduced into, well, the defense is not calling him a kid, they call him a man, trying to stray away from, him being a youth, a 17-year-old kid. And I also wanted to add that I think it's will probably have a little effect is the fact that how at times disrespectful the defense attorney is to the judge, the woman judge, and I believe that will come into play too when you talk about those. It's an all-woman jury once again. So.
Yes, and I think this judge has run a very, very tight case. I mean, she's kept it moving. It's been very, very fluid, and she stands up. I mean, I have just applauded the way she's run that courtroom, really.
Well, she, I believe, is on Wednesday. She and the lead defense lawyer really got into it over whether or not, when the judge asked George Zimmerman, did he believe that he wanted to testify in his own defense, and I imagine I've heard some legal experts on this trial say that the lawyer is supposed to get, whether it is for the prosecution or the defense, is supposed to try, it's a game of chess, and you're trying to get every advantage that you can. You're trying to get everything established on the record, Robert.
Yeah.
But it just seems to me decorum and rules of the court at times just seem to be trampled upon in watching some of this testimony.
Well, it showed a disrespect.
If nothing else.
Blatant disrespect. And here you're on national television, and women are looking at this, even though it was out of sight of the jury, I must say.
Yeah,
He did that out of sight of the jury, but that just told you a lot about them. I think the defense has been extremely cocky during this entire time, and one of them begins with the D, the guy, the tall one with the dark hair. He has been on CNN. He's been talking all week long. And I just say that is totally, totally ridiculous, because I don't even think they think their client is innocent. And I like how the prosecuting attorney had George Zimmerman's words come back to haunt him. And this morning, the defense was on doing their closing arguments, and I found out that the defense was painting Trayvon Martin as a thug, as a suspect, and that's another word that George Zimmerman used when he was talking on to the non-emergency call. He called him a suspect. I mean, it was totally, totally ridiculous how they painted this young man who went to 7-Eleven, picked up the Skittles and the Arizona iced tea at 7 o'clock at night. It wasn't late at night. It was 7 o'clock at night. And it's just, they are pandering to me on what so much of white America may think of young boys. And I want to say this. I got to say this. I got to get up on my soapbox. Being a mom of a male son, being friends, having a brother, having relatives, and you all right here, I feel that black males walk around so much with a target on their back. I really do. I hate to say that, but just because you're in the law, you're a firefighter, you're a journalist, doesn't mean that somebody else is going to respect that. They look at you as a black man.
Well, I mean, part of, not to cut you off, Brenda, I mean,
okay.
let's go back and refresh our memories about, that actual night. I mean, remember, George Zimmerman was told to stand down. I mean, the whole idea that, he pursued Trayvon really kind of defied the logic that we've all kind of talked about today and we've been talking about for months. But he actually received, George Zimmerman did, more than a recommendation, advice, sort of directive to stand down, do not pursue. And so we have to remember the chronology of what happened on that evening, in addition to what's happened in the courtroom. I certainly pray that, and I certainly expect that the jurors will keep all of that in mind in addition to the last 2 or 3 weeks.
Okay, we have so much to talk about and we have to move along, but I want to basically just say this on the national level, that the House Republicans pushed through a farm bill without food stamps, and that usually was attached to the farm bill. And Chris, did you get some information about that?
Yes, it's really, in my personal opinion, something terrible. One of the Republican, I believe it was party, had mentioned that he would go basically to the end of the earth to make sure that this bill did not, or this bill went through. It's an attack on individuals who need this type of assistance, and even tying in the Trayvon Martin and just the perception of people of color. For some unexplained reason, this type of perception of food stamps has been attached to people of color.
Right.
And statistics show that predominantly the beneficiary of this government aid is not African Americans. Personally, within the last week, I was out in Novi, and I was helping a friend out there in line at Kroger. I was the fourth person in line, and two out of the first three customers were white, and 2 out of 3 of them used a bridge card. Now, I don't have any bias toward a person using a bridge card, but my problem comes in where the perception is that it's only the African American community or it's only the Latino community that are benefiting from these programs that the government facilitate. And I think that, again, Robert talked about how things can come back to haunt individual. I think that this could be one that can come back to haunt that party, because most likely some of their own family is leveraging that food stamp program to get the basic necessities. Not everyone is abusing the system, and most definitely most of the individuals are not African Americans. So.
One of the things that I just want to sort of deal with the political aspect of it is, next year we go into what's called the midterm elections, when all of the House of Representatives, the 435 members of the House, and a third of the Senate go up for election. We've got some pretty important elections here in Michigan in the midterm cycle. It's going to be interesting to see if there is a backlash, because I certainly agree with you, Chris. I mean, the reality is, in pure numbers, there are a lot more white people who are recipients of food stamps than black people, just in terms of the raw numbers of it. I see this. We saw this last year in the presidential election. I think the very hard right of the Republican Party, the Tea Partiers and others, really don't get it. I don't think they've still learned the lesson. I mean, narrow politics, the narrow sort of scope of their politics really don't resonate that well on the national level. They are able to get some people elected in some congressional districts. But I don't know that this is something that's going to play well for them, and I hope that it doesn't. I mean, because the reality is subsidies go to a lot of people. The Farm Bill itself is a subsidy bill. I mean, farmers are paid subsidies to grow crops. I mean that's how they make their living. I'm not knocking that, but that is another constituency, just like men and women or families who receive food stamps. So I say bring it on in one sense, because going into next year, I think some people are going to get knocked out of some races because of their vote on this.
Well, Representative Rosa DeLauro of Connecticut said the vote for this bill is a vote to end nutrition in America. And Senator Debbie Stabenow of Michigan right here says it's an insult to rural America. And anti-hunger groups call the passage of the Farm Bill without a food stamp program a disgrace. Today's vote is the latest smoking gun that the House majority isn't truly interested in deficit reduction. They're interested in supporting special interest groups over hungry Americans. And I do think that they're trying to build a caste system. Them that got and them that don't. Robert?
Yeah, I want to add on, and I think all of us share the same sentiments on this topic. It's going to come back and bite them. I think we shared that earlier. But I think they're doing it strategically. They wanted to take out the SNAP provisions and separate it from the Farm Bill, pass the Farm Bill, make that part look good. They're going to bring it up. I think they want to bring it up separately and maybe not fund it as much as it's being funded right now. And once again, it's still going to come back and haunt them.
Well, I think people have, I hope they keep their memories, because I've known in elections people to have short memories. Now, we're going to go on to some local politics and other things. Ken?
Well, let's certainly talking about local politics, but keeping our lens focused on Washington, D.C. We've heard this week that, again, as we've heard continually, that there is no big bag of money coming from Washington, D.C. to help save the cash-strapped city of Detroit. We heard news this week that the White House is saying, we don't have any money for you, Detroit. You've got to sort of figure it out yourself. This is sort of the latest word out of D.C., or certainly from the White House, that there won't be a financial aid package coming from Washington, D.C. like we saw some 35 years ago for New York City.
Or like people talk about the auto industry and how they came in and helped to save the auto industry. I mean, you only get one save.
Or Wall Street.
And I think that you can trace a lot of this back to perception. Detroit has a perception nationally of being a black city, being a violent city, and I think that the decision makers have no vested interest or connection to the city. You have a emergency manager by the name of Kevin Orr, and I find that ironic that his name is Kevin Orr because, or what? You know, it's no or, it's just Kevin. it's not an or. We have no other option.
That's
and so
pretty good, Chris.
this is really, but this is a wake-up call. You know, I think that you have to look at both sides, and there's a certain amount of personal responsibility that each individual, whether a employee or a citizen of the city of Detroit, needs to galvanize in themselves and even in the community to say that you're right. There is no big bag of money. No one is going to come in and save this city. And so with that mindset, what can we can't change the totality of the future in one day, but we can change the direction. And so I think that on a case-to-case basis, it's a good thing to have to assume more responsibility personally, because with that assumption of responsibility comes the ability to control your own future. And I personally, as a Detroit firefighter over the last 11 years, I wrote down, I was faced with a layoff about 8 years ago. And it had came so close that where they had about 35 of us in a class, and we were moments away from getting laid off. And I remember writing in a folder, "It's on me now." And so that is the mindset that I would really encourage all individuals to take, that it's on us as individuals. No longer can we rely on a city or on a company to insulate or protect us from the winds of an economy. We have to...
Well, on that,
What about your pension?
what about the politicians? We're going to get into pensions in just a moment, but what about the politicians who sit up and say, I'm going to get you a job, I'm going to get, how in the heck? Well, I guess they could attract businesses here, but when businesses come, we have to be ready. You have to be ready.
Well, I think that,
and then you can start your own thing too. I believe in.
I think that when someone from a political perspective says that we're going to bring jobs to the city, that obviously, unless they're the owner of a company, they cannot guarantee those jobs. But what I have seen, that there are certain clauses, or if I worked as a pipe fitter out of Local 636, and I know when you had certain contracts with the city of Detroit, you had to employ so many city residents. And so from that perspective, there are some assurances of citizens of the city of Detroit to gain employment with these different projects. And I think that may be one of the avenues that the politicians kind of lean their elbow on when they say we're going to bring jobs to the city of Detroit. So, but I'm not sure.
No, that's accurate. That's an accurate assessment. I know when they try to get employers here to go out there and talk to them, and once they bring them here, or they try to get them here, and part of getting them here is they have to employ a certain number, 60%, 70% of the city's residents, period. So you can circulate those taxes in the city.
But you know, sometimes I ask people about their skills. I mean, I want to break it down, and it may not be popular, but there are a lot of people who need to go back to school and refresh their skills or even gain some new skills. And then there's certain jobs that people won't work. They say, I don't want to work at a grocery store. I don't want to be a bagger. I don't want to be a this and that. I mean, come on now.
I think that there are always going to be those exceptions, but I think that as a whole, you have a city of unemployed individuals who are willing to work. They just need that opportunity. And so these calculated or negotiated clauses are to ensure that they get a fair shot, because we know that the world that we live in, the Zimmerman case, and so forth and so on, it can be black and white. It can be black and white. And so I think that the politicians or the individuals in power, they try to position the citizens of the city of Detroit, whether black or white, because it's not a black citizen of the city of Detroit, it's a citizen of the city of Detroit. And so that is not to say a black person, a white person, a Hispanic person, a citizen of the city of Detroit, to give their constituents a fighting chance at these positions.
Well, I wish we could talk about this forever, but we got to move on because Kevin Orr wants to end health care for police and firefighters who retired early, and some things are going on there. Let's talk a couple of minutes on that.
Well, obviously this hits home with me, Brenda, and it is, personally, if I could sum it up in a word, it's a travesty. Unlike pension obligation or pension benefits, health care is not it's not constitutionally protected, and so there really isn't much leg to stand on. It was always understood that if you were a police officer, a firefighter, and you went out, you worked your 25 or 30 years. My case, for example, I became a firefighter when I was 23. The average age for retirement was 25 years. And so if I worked those 25 years, I would be eligible for a retirement at 48. Now, what I think people tend to forget, and these politicians may tend to forget, is that my family has watched me break bones, and they've asked me continually.
You've broken your back.
I've broken my back. I've got scars everywhere, burns everywhere, and my family asks every day I go into the firehouse, will he come back?
Yeah.
And you get to the end of your 25 or 30 years, and you say, I made it. But now, with everything that's going on, now you have to step back and say, well, maybe I didn't.
And so that folks are clear, Chris, under state law, the pension is protected under state law, not the health care and benefits per
Yes,
se.
the pension has some protection, although that is a target of the state and the emergency manager as well.
Right.
What they're proposing is that Medicare come in and supplement where they have offered, the city has offered these retirees health care. And so the program is under the Affordable Care Act. And you know, there's going to be some outlining costs though that these retirees are going to have to figure out how to pay for.
Yeah, and on top of that, there are some states that are refusing to implement portions of the Affordable Health Care Act, Obamacare.
And what it's really doing is it's really taking away options. You know, someone retires at 55 years old, beat up firefighter, because you're not going to retire in great health. You're going to be broken down, you're going to be beat down, and now you got to go out and find another job that's going to offer you health care. Well, who's going to hire you? Another fire department? You think that they're going to hire a 55-year-old firefighter? You know, and so you have a dynamic where, again, those decision makers are not affected by the decisions that they make. And so when you have any type of dynamic or recipe like that, someone who cooks the dish, prepares the dish, but never has to taste it, you know, it can really set up for a really bad taste in our mouth, literally and figuratively so.
Wow, the saga does continue. If you want to call us, 313-868-0342. Now, Tom Barrow's challenge to keep Duggan off of the ballot was denied by the state, but it's not. The saga's not over. Ken, can you tell us about this?
This does continue to be a saga, Brenda, to be sure. A couple weeks ago, the State Appeals Court said that, according to the charter, Mike Duggan, candidate for mayor, had no standing to be on the ballot, have his name printed on the ballot. Duggan came back a week or so ago and said, well, I'm going to run as a write-in candidate, which triggered mayoral candidate Tom Barrow and labor activist Robert Davis to file a suit against Mr. Duggan and his ability to run as a write-in candidate. What we're seeing this week is the state director of elections, has said that Mike Duggan can, in fact, be a write-in candidate. And so you have to have a scorecard, guys, every day to sort of figure out what's going on in the Detroit mayoral election of 2013. Next Monday will be a big showdown because the Judge Popke, the judge that essentially who did throw Mike Duggan off the ballot a few weeks ago, will hear the Barrow and Robert Davis case, and so we could find out as early as next Monday whether Mike Duggan can run as a write-in candidate in the primary election.
Well, his commercials are on.
Yep, he's on TV and radio in full rotation, to be sure.
In full regalia.
Yeah,
In regalia. It's ironic. It seems like people would check this stuff out before it happens because this is jerking the citizens back and forth also. Don't you think?
Well, you know, I'm going to answer that and then toss this one over to Robert to the extent that, I mean, I've always made the argument that, you know, you put two lawyers in a room and they'll tell you different things, and judges usually obviously interpret the law and then you get some type of resolution. But throughout this saga, as we've called it, lawyers have agreed and disagreed on aspects of what the charter says, on aspects of what case law says, and so we'll just have another round, another inning in this 9-inning game on Monday where the judge interprets the go-ahead that the State Election Commission has given Mike Duggan.
And I honestly believe that it's not going. She's not going to turn that one down. I think that he's going to be a write-in candidate.
Oh, why do you think that?
I just don't see the precedent that actually Barrow's going with putting him off the ballot. I don't see it.
You know, it seems that that's what Barrow's been talking about. That's all he's been talking about. What are the issues? I'm not impressed with anybody. No one.
Well, I've said for a long time that I don't have a dog in the fight, and situations like this even make me more resistant to actually supporting a candidate. I mean, I even this week, here's my luck, y'all, I even had this week an opportunity to watch a mayoral debate that was streamed on the web, and then my Comcast service went out, and the whole neighborhood, we lost power. It's really sort of symbolic of my real angst about this whole campaign. It's just no issues, just great sound bites, a lot of action. I mean, as a former political reporter, I love the action, but I'm sad because we aren't talking about issues. I want grass cut, I want police protection, I want public service protection, and we're just not
We
hearing
have
it.
a caller on the line. Hate to interrupt, but we have a caller. Good afternoon, caller.
Good afternoon.
Who are we speaking with? Who are we speaking?
Unfortunately,
Who
only
are we
have
speaking with? I'd like to know your name.
this Brother Knight.
Hello, Brother Knight. You got about a minute.
Yeah, you know, the only two top contenders that are actually running that has a chance of winning is Crystal Clinton and who I'm voting for, Benny Napoleon.
You think so?
The rest of the folks are running, and that's to split the votes. And hopefully people will realize who actually the two contenders are that are running. And my other thing, I want to make sure the listeners vote for Deanna Wilcoxon for city clerk and Monica Patrick for city council at large.
Well, tell them buy some ads on the station.
All righty.
Okay, thank you, Brother Knight. Yes, a lot of them are going around and everything, and I was talking to someone about Miss Crittenden the other day, and she seems like a very, very nice person who got in the race without the money, and they were hoping to have this grassroots campaign going, but unfortunately, money talks in this city.
You have to be able to get your word out. I mean, I've worked as a campaign. I worked on political campaigns as a media consultant, and I will tell you, despite what some people will say, the reality is he or she who is able to tell their story through mail, through television, and through radio, and races like this, are usually the two people in this case that will end up surviving the primary. The others who aren't able to get their message out won't resonate with people. 35–40% of the electorate for the primary are people who vote absentee. People are voting, people will start voting, now through August. And if you are on air, or if you've done a wide mailing, or if you have a team that has dozens of people out on the street every day, you're going to be advantaged in that. If you don't have that money, you just aren't. And all these people are nice people. I mean, I know probably most of the candidates for mayor. I've either worked with them, covered them, or something. And I think there are people who want to do great for the city. The reality is most of them probably are not going to do very well in this primary. They're not going to get outside of 5 or 6% of the vote.
And arguably, they're not talking about many of the issues. So I don't think
You were at the.
I was at the last mayoral forum. Actually, I've been to about 3 or 4 of them, and no one seriously is talking about the issues. You know, everyone has, like you said before, their own personal sound bites, what they want to do, blah, blah, blah. But how are you going to repopulate the city? I want to know some, serious questions. You know, we're half our population's gone. How are you going to repopulate the city? What are you doing? Most of the jobs are in the suburban areas. What are you doing to help regionalize the area when it comes to transportation? Things like that. I mean, those are not softball questions that they've been asked. At this last live United Way Southeastern Michigan forum, a lot of the questions looked like that were staged already. And, everybody bring their own personal team in there to ask questions. It was really, and this is at all the forums they do this, and no one's asking tough questions at all.
Well, let's guarantee this. We're going to change up a little bit after the primary, and we're going to have candidates come on this show, and we're going to question them rapid fire. Guys, let's guarantee that.
I'm with it.
I mean, it takes courage. You can't just, because they're not talking. What I've seen, I haven't been impressed. What I've heard, I have not been impressed. There are a lot of talking to the converted. They're pandering. I need to know how specifically you're going to do certain things. I'm not impressed at all. Now, we usually do a social issue on this show. And in light of what we heard, it's funny because I send the guys the outline of what we're going to talk about on the show. We send that in about, I send it the day before. And one of the things that I sent in this was my question yesterday. Should parents pay for the offenses of their juvenile children, especially if the offense happens after curfew? And what do I see this morning? I see at 3 o'clock in the morning, a juvenile, 12 years old, broke into a bank, the bank on Greenfield near 10 Mile in Southfield. And he was on his bike. He used his bike to break the window. He went in and went into the cash drawer, gotten cash. He also had snacks and everything. And then his parents went to his mother went to the police department to get him, and they wouldn't let her get him at that time. Now I hear he might be in her care. 12 years old, out at 3 o'clock. What's happening? What do you feel?
I have no problem, Brenda, with fines levied against custodial parents in particular situations. Certainly the situation that you've outlined, what we know about it now. I don't have any problem with leveling, some type of fine against the parent for the destructive circumstance that their child carried out, particularly a 12-year-old. You probably might be able to find some cases where I would stray away from that position, but that's where I'm at on it right now. I think we've got to send a signal to parents and obviously to perpetrators, whether they're 12, 22, or 32.
Yeah, I want to add that, in most cases, you can hold a parent liable for damages when you're talking about when one of their kids commit some type of damage against, like you said before, a store or whatnot. But like Ken said, it's only to a certain extent. I can't.
To what extent? What extent? What extent? What extent?
Case by case, I can do it. I can't do it on it.
Well, if a 12-year-old took somebody's life in that particular situation that we're outlining, I'd have to see the set of circumstances, but I'm not saying try the mother and father on first-degree murder or second-degree murder for what the child is accused of doing. I'm all for fines and levies, and as Robert pointed out, a lot of municipalities already have them on the table. City of Detroit has a curfew. Other cities do too. If you violate that, there ought to be a penalty paid. I don't know about hard time and hard labor, certainly financial fines.
I think that there has to be some type of check and balance. This is a snapshot of an even larger issue. For anyone who is familiar with just how maybe some things go in some tough neighborhoods, there are certain entities that leverage children who are under age to
Commission.
commission them to do certain crimes because they know that they're not going to get tried as an adult. And I think that there needs to be more responsibility put on a parent, especially for multiple offenders. If your child is continually to be involved in this, and it's really showing negligence on your part, I think that we live in a society that is so hypocritical because an employer can be responsible for an employee, you can be responsible for a pet, but you're not even responsible for your own child.
I understand that, but I said a case-by-case basis because you have some deviant kids out there, and their parents are well-to-do parents. They taught their kids
Andy Dillon's son.
to do right, don't do wrong, but they're going to go out there and do things anyway because they have their own mind. You have 15-year-olds, 16-year-olds, coming in themselves, want to do everything themselves. You can't hold a parent at all times accountable for their
Well, maybe you, okay, I understand what you're saying, and maybe you can't. But my thing is, something had to start years ago, maybe with this young man, as far as values being taught, as far as, what I notice now that a lot of young people don't have any fear. They have no fear. I mean, my kids, they'd be scared to be caught. I mean, they sneaked and did a lot of things, but
I didn't even go to the refrigerator at 3 o'clock in the morning, let alone
Go to a bank, and so you hit it
My
there.
5-year-old's doing that. I better stop this right now.
You hit it on the nose, Brenda, that there's no fear as far as from the child's perspective, but really there's no check and balance as far as a parent's perspective. There is a serious issue, and this is just a snapshot of neglect, of lack of check and balance. A 12-year-old, 3 o'clock in the morning, I don't know, but I stayed, 12 years old, I stayed with my grandparents, and my mom stayed there too. I don't know if their hearing has gotten worse because I can tell you my grandmother could hear a light switch turn on from the basement onto the second floor, when I was 12.
Absolutely. I mean, Big Mama's had that hearing that way.
Absolutely. But she was little mama too.
We've had the conversation, y'all. I mean, we've seen criminal cases where teens have been tried as adults. I think by natural extension, you're going to see more and more situations in municipalities and in counties where parents are being leveled with serious charges, maybe something more than fines for the transgressions of their children. I think it's going to happen. I do worry about that to an extent, but I'm also as much law and order and want to see a safe community as anybody else. So I grapple with some of it.
okay, we just have a few more minutes. I wonder what the audience thinks about that, but we're moving on ahead and moving on along. Chauncey Billups has come back to the Pistons. What do you think?
Mr. Big Shot.
Well, first of all, I want to say welcome back, Chauncey. If you're watching, you probably are. And so welcome back. But I think, with all due respect to you, Mr. Big Shot, the bigger story is the signing of Josh Smith. And we have a dynamic, above-the-rim power forward who's going to play, small forward, power forward, who's going to play on our front court with Andre Drummond and, man, I'm forgetting our other big man. But we've got a formidable front court.
I'm okay with the Chauncey Billups signing. I think he's more of a mentor in this role. He's not a starting point guard a la 2003 and 2004. I think we saw something similar with bringing Rasheed Wallace on as a bench coach. I think Tom Gores and Joe Dumars have said, we've got some young talent. We want to nurture that talent. And, bringing some of these old names back probably do sell some tickets, too. And so I think it probably has both a financial aspect to it, but then also sort of a mentoring and maturity aspect to it.
Yeah, I definitely agree with the Phillips and Rasheed Wallace. We have a terribly young team, and that mentorship is going to pay off in volumes.
Well, you hope so,
Yeah.
but I don't know about that.
I think that understandably Joe Dumars has an affinity toward these guys. They got him a championship, but that championship, with all due respect, was an anomaly. There's never been a team to win like that before, and most likely there won't be a team to win without that star caliber. So, with all due respect, we enjoyed it, we celebrated it, but we really need to embrace the way the league is going. The league is
Absolutely,
going toward
absolutely.
getting these star players.
There are
and-
only 6 or 8 of those guys. Every team is not going to have one of those guys. I agree with you. I like Josh
I
Smith, and
understand,
and
but
think
when you
he's gonna
spend
be-
your wad on the mid-tier free agents before, you know, the big
Well,
summer is next year
it's a
with
2-year
Carmelo, LeBron, so forth and so on. And so when we've historically done this. We went after the mediocre talent, the Villanuevas, the Ben Gordons, and not really
The
giving ourselves.
Darkos.
Who else would have come?
Well, how would you know?
I think
How would you know if you don't?
Okay, guys,
I
we
think
can
Chauncey's better
continue
than those
this.
guys. So I think he's going to get it's 2 years for $5 million.
Okay, we'll continue this.
Yeah, I think
We can continue this. We need to have that thing that they
Save that money
have.
for next year.
We need to do that thing they have on Bill Maher after the after the show type. We keep on talking. But ladies and gentlemen, we treasure you viewing us today on Table Talk with Brenda Perryman. As you see, we make it through a lot of topics, and I think we do a pretty good job on it. Thank you, guys. I really appreciate you. And next week when we come to you, we will know, hopefully, the verdict in the George Zimmerman trial. We will know if Mike Duggan is going to still be a write-in candidate. There's so much that we will know. So join us again next week at 1 o'clock here on TV 33 WHPR for Table Talk with Brenda Perryman. And thank you very much for joining us, and we will see you next week.